It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? It's the Take Command podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. And Logan, it is time for an annual tradition. It is time for our NFC East positional group rankings. Today, we're going to do the offense. So we will rank each team's unit of quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, and offensive line. We will get to the defense next week on the show, but I look forward to doing this every year. Sometimes we look really smart when we do this. Other times we underestimate that CeeDee Lamb's about to become like the third best receiver in football, and we look very silly a year later, but that's credit to CeeDee Lamb. So we will dive right in, Logan, with the quarterbacks because, well, everything always starts with a quarterback. And I actually think in some ways it's interesting, in some ways it's not. Who do you think is the best quarterback / who has the best quarterback room in the division, which really comes down to who's your QB1? And I don't know that there's too much depth talk here.
No, I think for me it's obviously the Dallas Cowboys with Dak Prescott. I think, everyone he tends to be much maligned in terms of kind of how the nation views him, but I think he's very productive. I think depending on the season, he's top 8. Sometimes he's sniffing top 5 in terms of production. Like last year, he was outstanding. Obviously, there's the playoff meltdown, but I think when you look at the body of work, like he's got to be the guy. And I know there are some limitations to his game, but he kind of reminds me of like a Kirk Cousins plus. He's a guy that makes your team better, elevates your skill position guys, has a little bit more playmaking ability. So for me, I think he's got to be definitively the number one guy, right?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. And I think it's something that people don't necessarily fully appreciate. And I don't know that I even appreciated how good people that study it think Dak was until the Athletic Football Show did their quarterback rankings about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago at this point. And they had Dak as like the 6th best guy in the league or something like that, 7th best guy in the league. And for them, it was, contract included, plus like a 3-year window, et cetera. But basically like Derek Klossenberg from Reception Perception, who charts all the quarterbacks every year, and some of the other guys that Robert Mays had on, were like, Dak has such a level of autonomy and control at the line of scrimmage. Like he kind of has, not that he's Peyton Manning, obviously he doesn't execute at the level that Peyton Manning did, but the ability to like be in control of the offense and have the entire playbook and stuff. Like it is Manning-esque in the amount of control that Mike McCarthy trusts him to have. And that's a skill. Like that's an attribute. If you were to redraft the league, Dak Prescott's one of the first 8 guys off the board without question. He's got to obviously play better in the playoffs. And even in last year, like he had a couple really critical mistakes early in that game that dug them a hole, but he still wound up with like 400 yards in that game. He just kept battling. And so if you make it situation agnostic, it's a no-brainer that Dak Prescott is the best quarterback in the division. And that's with Jalen Hurts, who was the MVP, 2 years ago? But I think if you just look at the actual player, situation agnostic, who's the best? It's Dak, and it's not close.
No, I'm 100% with that. I think the only criticism you could potentially levy is that the roster is kind of deteriorating around him because of the contract structure, and they're going to have to give him an extension here pretty soon. So I think that's the only thing
they should have done it a year ago.
Yeah, right. And again, I think the fact that he doesn't seemingly win big games is the other thing that you'd probably say. But in terms of this division, I don't think even, Jalen Hurts is probably the second guy, and I don't even think it's close, honestly. Like if I'm picking a team, like in that example you gave for the next 3 years, like he's the guy, emphatically the guy. So I know that people want to hate on him, but I think he's the right pick, and it helps having, great playmakers on the outside, with a guy like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. But he makes that thing go down there, and he's a lot of fun to watch for sure.
For sure. He's accurate. He's decisive. He used to be a better runner, but still has the mobility. The one thing that I think could fairly say is for the majority of his career, he hasn't really had to worry about offensive line issues. He's had such a good line in front of him. But he also gets them in the right play. And again, there's a lot of mental responsibility that he takes on that enhances who he is as a player. I do think the second guy is Jalen Hurts. I think the goal is hopefully eventually Jayden Daniels passes him, but Jayden Daniels hasn't taken an NFL snap yet. Clearly, Daniel Jones is not better than Jalen Hurts, but I think it's Hurts second, and his I think it's such a critical year for him, obviously, in terms of like what we think of him as a player moving forward. He's already gotten paid, so it's not like he's got to worry about that, which is nice for him. But he's got to be a quarterback that they win because of in Philly moving forward, because he got paid, as opposed to a guy that you can win with. And that delineation, I think, is where you draw the line, and especially in quarterback play of there's certain guys you can win with. There's certain guys that you win because of. And if you're going to pay a guy, he better be a guy that you win because of. And I think that's the question for Jalen Hurts. And for Kellen Moore, by the way, taking over as OC, can he turn Jalen into that guy in 2024?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think they're, watching him in the first 10 games or so last season, you kind of thought, oh, maybe he is a more dynamic playmaker than you want to admit, right? Like, at least I wanted to admit. But I think you still saw some of the issues from like a technical quarterback perspective, holding on the ball too long, not anticipating throws, not trusting space in the defense, which leads to him holding the football. And it works out well for him because that offensive line there is just that good, that he can hold the ball back there and make those plays. Also, I think getting away from running him really hurt what he was able to do throwing the football. It kind of presented more complicated coverage structures. And again, that this is not all on him. He's learning a new offense last year, and that offense was really, I think, kind of overly simplistic and didn't put him in the best position to be successful. Like when you watch that offense last year, it was pretty much like, oh, we have AJ Brown, we have what's the tight end's name?
Smith.
Dallas Goedert. We have these three guys that can win. Our offensive line's awesome. Like Jalen, go figure it out for us. And so there's like a lot of off schedule stuff. And it's just, and again, that's very applicable in today's NFL, but it's just hard to live like that all the time. And that's kind of what they were doing. And they didn't run him as much. He went from being the quarterback that ran the most, had the best running percentage in 22 to the lowest or the worst in 23. So it was a pretty dramatic shift. And it really, really hurt that offense, I thought, because like they went from kind of this, it was like such a brilliantly innovative play. Now everybody in college done it, where it's like, it's a zone read to a pass concept to a run. So it's really, truly triple option, but kind of structured for the NFL. And and he ran that masterfully. So he got a ton of completions. He got a ton of rushing yards. And then he took that out of the offense, and I think it really hurt him. And I think the other thing there with the contract is they always, when they were good, so for the last 3 or 4 years, they relied on being the better roster. And they were often the better roster for a very long time. And now, because of the contract structure, I think it's starting to level out a little bit in terms of guys they can re-sign. Their right guard from 2 years ago, who was maybe the best right guard in football, leaves and goes to Detroit. They have to fill that need with a rookie, Tyler Steen from Alabama, right? So it slowly kind of eating away. And you look at the receiver depth at the moment, it's nobody. It's a bunch of rookies because they can't pay anybody outside of that first room. So and as a result, to your point, a lot of responsibility falls on Jayden or Jalen, to make plays. And to me, I'm just not confident enough, if he's not running the football like he was in 22, that he can do that exclusively as a passer.
Yeah, the way Howie Roseman, their GM, has built it is really interesting because they've paid most of their stars. And it's like, hey, these guys are worth it. We'll fill it out. And I actually don't necessarily disagree with that strategy. It's like, hey, you want to know who wins football games? AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts. They've got guys that can help you win games, and then you fill in the rest with rookies and bargain guys. We'll see though, because that also just eliminates your margin for error in terms of depth, like you said. We'll get to the receiver room in just a few. I think the actual most interesting discussion in terms of rankings, because that's what's really important, Logan. Where are you on podcast rankings? Is between Jayden Daniels and Daniel Jones. Presuming that Jayden is QB1 here, is he better walking in day one starter than Daniel Jones? Which feels like, I'm sure there's a lot of Commanders fans listening that are like, yeah, Daniel Jones sucks. And it's like, well, he wasn't very good last year. He was awesome 2 years ago. And let's not underrate him. Well, I know, again, for the Commanders fans, it's also like, well, it depends. Is he playing us or not? But, for Jones, like, he's a solid NFL, like, starter that you can win with. Definitely not a win because of guy.
Right.
And by the way, his contract kind of reflects that. Like, he got paid a lot of money, but percentage-wise, to the cap compared to, like, what Hurts got or what Burrow and them are getting, it's not the same. So long story short, or long question short, would you take for 2024 a rookie Jayden Daniels sight unseen, or what we think Daniel Jones is going to be?
When you phrase it like that, I'd probably take Jayden Daniels. I mean, I have a lot. I think I'm higher on Daniel Jones than a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because I think he does some stuff really well, especially like in 22 or whenever that was when they made that playoff run.
Yeah, 22.
You know, like the ability to run that keeper game, get to the perimeter, kind of work the high-low over there. Like that's a skill set, and that worked. And his ability to scramble for first downs, like I think the way they called games for him really raised the floor of that offense. And again, I don't think he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, but I think I was higher on him than a lot of people. I just think when you say, if I want a guy to start my franchise or to kind of build my franchise around going into this year, it's got to be Jayden Daniels. Like, there's almost no question in my mind. Jayden Daniels on a rookie contract, the athlete, the accuracy, the mental acuity, all the potential seems to be there. I think Daniel Jones is probably better at playing quarterback in the NFL right now because he's done it for 4 years or 5 years.
Well, that's
so
kind of that's kind of what I'm asking though, is like a situation agnostic, right? I tell you need to win a game or win as many games as possible in 2024. That you don't get to keep this quarterback long term. The contract doesn't really matter. You're just like fantasy drafting for 2024, except for real football, not for fantasy points and stat accumulation. Like, which guy do you want?
If I was the OC and if I was the head coach, I'd want Jayden Daniels. Like,
I don't disagree.
He just gives you a lot of opportunity to kind of say, hey, we can design a quarterback run game. I think he's competitive. I think he's smart. And that might be biased by what I've seen through the OTA minicamp period. Like, I've just been really impressed with how he processes stuff and how he works. And that level of professionalism is important to me. And having seen it live and in living color, coupled with what he did last year in college, it's like, I'm going to take my shot. And it's a little bit of an upside play, but not by much. You know what I mean? It's like, right. I'm projecting him a little bit, but I don't think it's like, it's like Daniel Jones is like a bare minimum starter, almost backup at the NFL level. I think Jayden Daniels, by the end of this year, we could be talking about him as a top 17, top 15 guy in the NFL, which would be fantastic for this organization. But I definitely think his ceiling's much higher than Daniel Jones for this season. And I think if Cliff and the staff, does a good job insulating him and developing him, like, I think that's the guy. I think he's going to be better.
I don't disagree. I mean, I think they're different as runners. I think Jones, you can run comfortably more often, but I also think you probably want to because I think Jayden's probably better from the pocket. And
at least
probably
that's what it seems like, right? At least that's what it seems like right now. Like, I mean, that sounds crazy because Daniel Jones is like, he's played quarterback in the NFL, but when I watch them operate from the pocket, and again, one's in minicamp, one's in OTAs, and the other's from live living bullets, but he's just smooth in the pocket, man. Like, in a way that I thought might be there, but to see it is like, wow, like this is pretty cool. So I think it's a combination of things with him, and I think that's why he's the second overall pick because of this kind of potential and this kind of athlete and what he gives to your offense in year one. And again, I'm taking Jayden Daniels, I think.
Yeah, not to mention Daniel Jones was a top 10 pick. Well, it's because David Gettleman wasn't very good at his job, which is why he doesn't have it anymore. So there's that. I agree with you that I would lean Jayden, but it's very close for 2024.
Yeah.
Obviously, if this is a 3-year situation, it's not remotely close. If you factor in contract, it's not remotely close. All that kind of stuff. It's just like Daniel Jones has a 4-year head start of experience, and Jayden Daniels hasn't actually put on NFL pads yet for a training camp practice. Nevertheless, a real game. And still, the fact that it's close is a testament really to both guys. But yeah, it's. I think I would take Jayden for 2024 as well. To the running backs room, where there was big offseason shakeups, big names going in and out of basically every room. So to recap the state of play here, the Commanders obviously have Brian Robinson and Chris Rodriguez still, but they add Austin Eckler to the room. The Eagles make the biggest splash. They have Saquon Barkley to go with Kenneth Gainwell, Will Shipley. The Cowboys bring back Ezekiel Elliott to go with Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn. Cool. And then the Giants have Devin Singletary, Eric Gray, Tyrone Tracy, and Jashawn Corbin. So I think this is another runaway victory for the Eagles with Saquon at the top of the room. This is kind of also funny because this is the one place where the Giants, we've given them like, hey, respect over the last couple of years because it was Saquon.
Right.
Obviously, injuries are a big deal. If we want to make it not necessarily like scheme agnostic, the way the Eagles have run the football over the years, and if you want to even like kind of add Jalen Hurts to this, their running game has been the best for sure. But I think from a talent standpoint, they're the best. I'd probably put Washington too, and then Dallas and New York can fight over whatever's left at the bottom because, man, those might be two of the worst running back rooms in the entire league.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think, obviously it's Philly because it's not only Saquon Barkley, but Kenneth Gainwell is a very productive starter in the NFL. And I think you add a guy like Will Shipley, and again, he's a rookie. We got to see what he does. But, he's that perfect kind of scat back slot mismatch weapon, jet sweep, bringing speed and explosiveness to your offense. So I think I would probably go them as well. And I think the other thing that needs to be factored in, and you can't give them double points for this, but their offensive line is tremendous. So whoever they put back there, as long as the offensive line stays healthy, is going to be crazy productive. Now we'll see what that looks like without Jason Kelce. A lot of what they were able to do over the last couple of years was kind of use him in these gun run situations, almost like a pseudo fullback. So they're able to get to overloads and do some interesting stuff at the second level because of that athlete. But I look at the bookend tackles, I look at the guard on the left side, Landon Dickerson, and they're going to be able to move some people around. And the idea of getting Saquon actual space to play with, because I'll say this about Saquon. As a running back, he's okay. As a playmaker, he's dynamic. So what do you want to give playmakers? You want to give them space. And if I can do that running the football, just handing it to him, like that's exciting. And one of the things that I remember watching, about Philadelphia's run game is it's like because those guys are so good, those tackles are so good at creating horizontal push, it's almost like a punt return. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how it feels when you're watching. So the idea of Saquon doing that, again, with Kenneth Gainwell, with Will Shipley, I think definitively that might be the best running back room in the NFL. Obviously, I think, obviously, Detroit has something to say about that. San Francisco probably has something to say about that, but it's a very dynamic group, and it's one that, as an offensive play caller, I'm sure they're really excited to kind of get those weapons on the field and maximize them.
For sure. And I think, obviously when you talk about best pure running back in the division, Brian Robinson's got something to say about that.
Yeah.
So I think Washington comes on strong here, like as a runner, as a guy who has vision and the ability to one cut, get downhill, execute, gap, zone, everything. Like Brian Robinson's really, really talented as a runner. And we've seen his hands, like he's more developed as an overall player than the NFL has seen because we thought that was going to be a huge part of what they did last year. And he just wasn't as involved in the pass game as we imagine. But we see, in minicamp, there's back-to-back plays where he's running up the seam, making tough catches as a receiver, and he's not the receiving back. Austin Eckler gets that. Chris Rodriguez is a tough runner. So, I think that room. And then, by the way, Jeremy McNichols has played a lot of football. And if he winds up making this team as another, third down type, depth-wise, I think Washington probably has the deepest room in the division. It's just you don't have a Saquon Barkley who is a different caliber of playmaker. But I think it's actually not I think it's closer between Philly and Washington than it is Washington and whoever you want to put third.
I agree. And again, me kind of hyping up Saquon Barkley and this Philadelphia running back room is not a slight on Brian Robinson. And I think Brian Robinson's a heck of a football player. I really do. I mean, I think he isn't there yet, but he definitely has the athletic potential to be top 5 guy in the league, and I just think about last year, if they would have used him more effectively, run the ball more, we're probably having a conversation about him being 1,000+ yard rusher, maybe a 400-yard receiving guy. And it's like, oh shoot, he's leading the NFL in all purpose yards. Like what the heck's going on? And I think he's got that skill set, and I'm really excited to see what he looks like in this Cliff Kingsbury offense. So that's not to say that there's this great disparity between Philly and Washington, because I don't think there is. I think when you look at what Austin Eckler does, I think he's pretty dynamic, especially with the ball in his hands, the pass protection, the strength that he runs with. And I really like Chris Rodriguez. And I don't know if the rest of the league views the running back room this way, the same way we do, but covering the team every day, it's like, I think they could be really, really special. I'm going to give the edge to Philly just because they've got, who I think is maybe one of the best athletes at the position in Saquon. But it's, like I said, maybe they might be the best running back room in the league. I definitely think Washington's top 5. I really do. I think they've just got the right pieces in place. And if they play to the level of the talent and everyone stays healthy, I think we could be having a much different conversation by the end of the season.
Yeah, this version of this, or the 2025 version of this, could be really interesting, depending on how Robinson plays this year, and how Cliff utilizes those guys. Dallas, there was a lot of talk about their running back room this offseason. They've always had a really strong running game to support Dak, and that's been a key part of who they are. And last year, they let Zeke go. They've tried to rely on Tony Pollard. It didn't really work because Pollard's probably better as a complementary piece. They never really replaced Zeke. And now they don't have Pollard, and they bring Zeke back 2 years after they were like, he's not really worth it anymore. And I think like Zeke is still an interesting and useful football player. Like, yeah, he doesn't belong out of the league, but he's just not the explosive player he was as a younger guy. Like, he took a lot of hits. He had a ton of carries at Ohio State. He had a ton of carries his first couple of years. He's not as dynamic or explosive. He's still an effective route runner. He's still a good pass blocker, and he still can run the football a little bit, but they just don't have any kind of dynamic playmaker in that room. They don't have any kind of versatility really in that room, because Dowdle is like a bigger guy, isn't he? And then you got Deuce Vaughn, who's like the little K-State, Darren Sproles type of whatever that is. And their offensive line's not as good as it used to be. So that to me is a very unimpressive room. And like, I like Devin Singletary for New York. Like, he's been a really good back in Buffalo, but that room's not very good either. So how you want to rank those two?
So I'd probably go the New York Giants running back room over, and it's just because the depth, the pieces get me a little bit more excited. So obviously, Devin Singletary I think is a very solid player, and I kind of think he I don't know if there's a big enough difference for me between him and Zeke in terms of production. I think he catches the ball well. I think he's a good physical runner, and then I think you look at Eric Gray, a guy who at the Senior Bowl a couple years ago really impressed as like a third down guy who's a kind of a squatty body. And then maybe one of my favorite kind of sleeper picks of the entire draft was Tyrone Tracy Jr. from Purdue. He's a converted wide receiver, ran a 4.3 something at his pro day, so 6'2", 210, but has some absolute juice. So I just say, like, in terms of pieces, and I think the backup running backs in Dallas are pretty solid too. Like you mentioned, Rico Dowdle. Like, I think he's a good player. Deuce Vaughn, I like this film coming out, but undersized. I just think the backup pieces and the electricity that a guy like the kid from Purdue can bring gets me a little bit more excited about what that offense can be in New York in terms of the running back room. Now, you want to talk about offensive lines, like that offensive line up there is tough, so it's going to be hard to run the football. But as a play caller, as someone that's excited about the weapons there, I'd probably be a little bit more excited about the New York Giants. But really, it's kind of like 6 in one, half dozen in the other. Like, beauty's in the eye of the beholder there, because they both don't look great.
Yeah. So I'll agree with you. I'll put New York third. Dallas, sorry, you're fourth here. All right,
Yeah.
let's go right into the offensive line then, because these obviously all go together, and then we'll get to wide receivers and tight ends in the final 15 of the show. So offensive line-wise, there's a ton of movement. The biggest movement, I guess, in the offseason is Jason Kelce retiring. But Philly had a plan. Like, Cam Jurgens was playing for them last year at right guard.
Well.
He played well. He moves inside to center. They knew that this was coming. Cam Jurgens was always their plan. They've got Dickerson, Mailata, and Johnson all locked up. They get Tyler Steen, who was practicing last year as well, and kind of knew that his time was coming. And then they also add some interesting depth as well. Mekhi Becton coming in as a backup there. So that's kind of the Philly offensive line situation. Obviously, Dallas continues to remake things. They draft Tyler Guyton to replace Tyron Smith. Tyler Smith is currently listed as their starting left guard. They lose Tyler Biadasz at center, and my not cousin Brock Hoffman is currently their center. Biadasz obviously coming to Washington. Zach Martin's still there. Terrence Steele at right tackle. New York's interesting on paper. Like, we'll rank these all in a second, just given the run of play here. But Andrew Thomas has been good. Jermaine El Munor, and then John Michael Schmitz is the rookie center. John Runyon they bring in free agency, and Evan Neal, big giant shrug emoji there. And obviously we know the run of play in Washington. We'll see who's at left tackle, whether it's Coleman, Lucas, or Scott. Allegretti, Biadasz, Cosmi, Wiley will be the other four, barring injuries. So Philly's still the Kings here in the division, even though they lose Kelsey and move some things around.
Yeah, I think because not only do they have a really talented kind of starting group, but they always are just restocking and retooling. They draft Trevor Keegan. They drafted Dakwa, who is again like the greenest of the green projects, but is one of those guys who's just a total freak physically. Lincoln Vailaki from Australia, another kind of Jordan Mailata clone there. Like they just do such a good job because their offensive line coach is so good. So you can take a shot on a guy like Mekhi Becton because you trust your offensive line coach to develop him. So I think like just from a talent standpoint, from a physical gifts standpoint, this is the group that gets you so excited. Obviously, Jordan Mailata I think is probably a top 5 left tackle in the NFL. Landon Dickerson's probably top 10 guard. Cam Jurgens remains to be seen, but I think he's going to be outstanding in that role, and I think his physicality and his movement skills are about as close to close to Jason Kelsey as you're going to get. Obviously, Tyler Steen went through his lumps last year, but I again, offensive line coach to get him right, and then Lane Johnson, no kidding, is probably the best right tackle in football, and I don't think it's even close. Maybe the best offensive lineman in football, and you're kind of talking about him and Trent Williams in the same breath, maybe Tristan Wirfs. So I think the depth, the coaching, the type of professionalism they have at those leadership positions, they got to be number one. Like I don't, again, like they might be maybe outside of Detroit, maybe one of the better offensive lines in football. So I definitely think Philly's the group there.
Yeah, Jeff Statlin's the most important guy in that room, the O-line coach who's just been tremendous for decades and decades in Philly. And, if you listen to the Kelsey podcast, To New Heights, like you hear Jason talk about Stout over the past couple of years and just how great of a coach he is, and the development emphasis they have in that room too. So like they're ready when guys go down or when Jason Kelsey retires. Like they do long-term planning in Philadelphia really well, and part of that is having the right coaches in place to make sure the next guys are ready. And I agree with you, Philly's still the top. I think it then becomes interesting because I could make some kind of case for really all 3 teams on an upside level. I think you have to look at realistically, what do we expect from these groups? And I think it probably comes down to Dallas and Washington here. And it's hard for Washington because when you don't know your starting left tackle, that's a tough sell. But also, if you look at Dallas, they have a rookie starting at left tackle right now. So what do we really know about Tyler Guyton and his ability to play left tackle in the NFL? Meanwhile, the best left tackle in the division, not named Jordan Mailata, is probably playing in New York. So I don't know. How do you rank them?
Oh God, it's tough. It's tough. So I just want to talk about Dallas real quick. I think Terrence Steele is a serviceable right tackle. Zach Martin, who again is probably a gold jacket type guy on the offensive line, is starting to trend down a little bit. And again, like that's always tough to talk about, but it happens for everybody. Like last year, you just look at I know PFF's not a perfect metric, but he was all blue grades, so 90 plus grades his first 8 years in the league, and then all of a sudden last year he's down in the yellow. So is he declining? Brock Hoffman, interesting. Is Cooper Beebe going to start there? I don't know if you want to start a rookie center. Tyler Smith, really good player, very, very good football player. So I think the pieces there, 3 of the 5 are really, really established. And then Tyler Guyton starting at left tackle is maybe the most interesting storyline for this team because he was one of the more raw prospects. Again, physically tall, long, good athlete, all the stuff you want to play left tackle, but not there yet. So you're going to start a guy who kind of from a quarterback perspective, everyone said, oh, this guy needs to sit for a year. Like Tyler Guyton was the offensive line version of that. So I think they probably have the most talented group, but like you said, there's a big question mark there in terms of the left tackle, and that might I'm not saying there's a question is he gonna be bad? Like he might not be serviceable. So then who's gonna play left tackle for you? Because he just was so green and potentially not ready to play. Now very talented, but I think at that
point, do you move Tyler Smith outside and play someone else at guard? There's a lot of questions there.
And so, but I do think in terms of just talent, you look at those names: Tyler Smith, Zach Martin. Even though he's maybe declining a little bit, one of the best football. And then Terrence Steele, while started the season last year sluggish, I think figured it out near the end. So I would say that group, just from a talent standpoint, feels right. I know there's some big questions, but the other groups also have pretty significant questions kind of across the board, And so I think you look at the Giants, they paid, a couple guys in free agency, the guards, to come in and kind of fill out some roles. Obviously, we know how good Andrew Thomas is, but Evan Neal, man, has been bad. He's been bad at football. And like, you're asking him to come in and play with guys that were kind of rotational. Runyon was kind of a rotational piece in Green Bay. He's going to be the starter now. He's okay, filling a role for you for sure. So I don't know how confident I feel in that. And then you get to Washington, where I'm higher on Wiley than a lot of people. I think Cosme's an excellent football player.
Cosme, there was just a guard ranking that came out that had Cosme as like the third best guy in football. So we talk about, when's Washington get a star, whatever. Do they, they haven't had anybody since Sheriff and Trent. And it's like, well, they got the next Sheriff, and his name's Sam Cosme.
Right. And I think he's tremendously fun to watch. He had a great year last year. But again, like, questions, like, Biotish at center, I feel very confident in, but left guard and then left tackle. And I think when you just weigh the questions, you kind of say, like, that's probably the worst group. Again, I think it can come together, and I'm confident in those three guys I just mentioned, Biotish, Cosme, and Wiley. Like, and I know I might be in the minority there with Wiley, but the other two spots, big question marks for me. Again, if they said, Lucas is going to start, I'd say, I feel great about that, because I think Lucas is a serviceable left tackle, but you're still left with the guard spot. And then I think you look at New York, and they have
just to be clear, because they bring in Allegretti. But Allegretti was a rotational piece. Like, in a lot of ways, Allegretti's like Runyon in New York, right?
So, I think they still got to figure it out. Yeah, figure out like what they're going to do there. And again, I think Allegretti's a fine football player, but it's like there's still some question marks about who's going to fill that role out. And I just think couple that with the left tackle. Again, I like three of them, but I think there's still some questions to be answered there. And so I'd probably give the slightest edge to New York, but it's really like, again, much like the running back thing with Dallas and New York we just talked about, kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder there.
Yeah, I think I'd probably lean Washington third, because
which would be fine.
I think Cosme's like a game changer. You can do stuff with him that you just can't do with a lot of other people. I know they've got Thomas in New York, but he's also been hurt nonstop.
Yeah. Right.
So I'd probably lean Washington. We'll have to see how Allegretti is. I think that's the big question right now. Is like, do you have one spot or two that you're trying to figure out? I think Allegretti's definitely going to be their starter, but how good is he? Because he was a rotation piece, even if he did fill in admirably in the Super Bowl there in Kansas City. And then again, like Lucas, he's fine, but he has limitations.
But I would take him. I would take him over Evan Neal probably right now
for sure.
You know what I mean?
I don't disagree with that. So yeah, I would lean Washington. I think I'm with you that Dallas is probably still second.
It's cool. They're definitely regressing.
Dallas also feels the most boom or bust. Like if they got Guyton right, if Smith takes a jump, like that could be a really good O-line.
Smith was good last year. Smith was great last year, but it's like still like it's a guy who is a little inconsistent. Is he still
like he's no longer, Biotish was there to help him last year as an experienced center. Like what happens and what does that do for, Allegretti at center? I mean, I guess he was playing next to a really good one in Creed Humphrey in Kansas City.
It can only help him out,
Yeah. So, all right, to the outside we go. The wide receivers and tight ends. Logan, any particular order you want to go here as our resident tight end?
No, I mean, I don't really care. It's all people catching the football. This was the most challenging one for me because like I thought everybody's got pretty good skill position players. Obviously, I think, New York's a little bit you know what I mean? So I'd probably put them fourth. But in terms of the other groups, I think you could make arguments for all of them that they should be the first, the first group. So, let's start with Philly and then kind of go through them from there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, do we want to separate wide receivers and tight ends or do we want to
let's separate
lump them all together?
Let's separate. That might make it easier to distill like what's actually going on.
All right. We'll save the best for last. Tight ends, you're last. All right. Wide receivers. I think Philly's clearly got the best high-end stuff, right? A.J. Brown's the best receiver, or he and CD are right there is 1-2 in the division. But Devontae Smith might be the third guy. Terry's obviously going to want a word there. But Devontae Smith is clearly the best two in the division.
Right.
I think the only argument against Philly is the depth situation, which we did reference earlier in the show, where like Paris Campbell is a threat. He's really fast. He's really big, but hasn't been kind of underwhelming in Indy. Now comes to Philadelphia. They drafted your guy, Johnny Wilson, who's an interesting guy, of course. Britton Covey has been a good punt returner, but how is he as a receiver? Been fairly, whatever. Whereas Washington, New York, maybe there's a little bit more. All right, Dallas, they've got some guys down the depth chart where you're like, oh, that guy's Kevontae Turpin is a weapon as the fourth receiver in Dallas, in a different way than Philly's got down the depth chart.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing about Philly, like you just alluded to. Obviously they've got Joseph Nagata, who's again a fine player, but not a big role in any offense, but I think is developing. Jacob Harris is this physical freak, but never really hung on anywhere outside of special teams. They got John Ross, the guy that used to hold the record for the 40 at the combine. They've got some pieces, but it does kind of feel a little bit like the land of misfit toys. Everyone's kind of trying to reclaim some form of glory, and sometimes that works. They come to Philadelphia and everything works out. But I do kind of agree that when you look at Dallas, Brandon Cooks, I think he's a great football player. Jalen Tolbert, good football player. CeeDee Lamb, good football player. You mentioned Turpin. They've got some weapons there that I think are a little bit more, what's the word? A little more established, a little bit more secure. Mm-hmm. They're making it a little bit more confident. And so I'd probably give the slightest edge to Dallas, just because I think
I don't disagree.
Again, if there's two guys,
would you take Lamb or would you take Brown?
God, that's to me it's such a stylistic question. Brown gives you the ultimate trump card. He's the true X. It's go in on a vertical, do it. You know what I'm saying?
But actually, often does really tremendous work out of the slot. That's the thing is he is the ultimate X, but he's a big X, but he's also the ultimate power slot. Where CD actually his best work is out of the slot as well, and maybe not quite as good if he's got a B press man on the outside as an X.
And that's
so
what I'd
probably
say.
Lean Brown, but it's not by much.
Yeah, and I saw again, stylistically, for what I want on my offense, I just love that for a quarterback. That here's a guy that's going to win, and CD has that. CD has that again from the slot. He's damn near uncoverable, and they do a great job of formationing stuff and putting him in good spots, using him very similar to how Kansas City used Travis Kelce. But in terms of just raw horsepower, I'd probably lean Brown. But again, it's such a stylistic question. What kind of offense are you going to run, and if
they're in the same bucket.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other thing is when you look at Washington, obviously Terry, Jahan, there's some interesting pieces here, but I don't think they have the high end, and I don't think they've got the total depth that make you go, oh, this is going to be a game-changing, revolutionary group. So I'd probably give the slightest edge to Dallas. To me, the big question is how much better do you think Devontae Smith is than
Brandon Cooks.
And if you think he's way better, then you go the other way. And I don't really have a strong feeling about that. I love Devontae Smith. I think he's a really good football player, but is he, head and shoulders above Brandon Cooks? Probably, but does he outweigh the other three guys on the roster there?
Right. Yeah. To me, Dallas and Philly are kind of 1A, 1B. Washington is 3, and then New York is, unless Malik Neighbors is just stupid as a rookie, which is possible, definitively 4th, way 4th, because behind Neighbors, they just don't have a lot. They have some guys that have, obviously had some production in the league, but from a consistency standpoint, it's just not there. Obviously we were hoping Jahan can have a bounce back year. Obviously we're hoping Terry can have a bounce back year. Luke McCaffrey, we'll see what he is as a rookie. Diami obviously has been what Diami's been. Zacchaeus, they've got guys that can play. Really 1 through 6. Demir Bird's had an all right career, but really 1 through 6 with Brown being more, rotational guy who's probably more useful as a pure vertical threat, take the top off of play action, but mostly a run blocker. Zacchaeus has had some solid years, and then Jamison Crowder he somehow gets open. But I think the depth, don't confuse familiarity with depth. Because I would think probably some Dallas and Philly people would say similar things about their guys. New York, Neighbors has the chance to be top 5 receiver in the league very soon. He's got that kind of juice. Slayton has been really good at times, but has kind of been inconsistent and injury prone. Wan'Dale Robinson, same thing.
I love Wan'Dale Robinson, but it's to your point. I love Wan'Dale Robinson, really good football player, but slot guy. And again, like, does that outweigh the fact that Slayton's been a little inconsistent? Hyatt has shown that he's got this great fastball, but like, can he do anything else? So there are some pieces there, but I don't think there's anybody that's like, this dude is, I think Malik Neighbors could be the X receiver, which might help Slayton in terms of production. But the other two teams, even Washington, they've got a dude. They've got Terry, they've got CeeDee Lamb, they've got AJ Brown, right? Dudes. And then they've got pretty serviceable twos. Like, I think, if you remember back to when Jahan was a rookie, like how productive he was. And I can't wait to see what he looks like in this offense, especially because it looks like he's working on some of the fundamentals of like beating press and doing some of that stuff. So I just think that the two there is better than anybody else. And then Malik Neighbors hasn't really established himself. So I think that's a pretty clear, definitive list there.
For sure. All right. So that leaves the tight end position. Washington, of course, has Ertz, Sinnott, Bates as their top three. Goddard, Uzoma, Calcaterra, the three in Philadelphia. Dallas has Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, Peyton Hendershot. And then the Giants have Daniel Bellinger, Theo Johnson, and Jack Stoll. And your boy Chris Manhertz still floating around too as their fourth tight end.
Chris Manhertz, right. What a great tight end name. Seriously.
Fantastic.
Gosh, that's a tough group because I think the best tight end in the division is Goddard. I don't know if there's any pushback on that from you.
No.
And I think they've got pretty good depth there. The problem is that offense, or at least as it existed, whatever it was, to last year, didn't use a lot of tight ends. They just kind of, were out there. And
Goddard was hurt a ton last year, which definitely hurt them as well.
Yeah, he was hurt. And I do think Calaretti is a good player, but has not done a lot. Jacob O, I can't say his name, but he was a pretty high draft pick in Denver, very athletic, but hasn't really developed. Maybe, I don't know. After looking at this, I don't know. Maybe I feel a little bit better about Dallas because I think Dallas has, and again, Dallas doesn't have like the sexy, they don't have the Dallas Goddard, but they do have guys that I think like Jake Ferguson's very solid, Luke Schoonmaker very solid, Peyton Hendershot very, very solid, and they just, in that offense, they don't need to be world beaters, and all three of those guys are going to be very productive. So I think because of depth and because of Goddard's injury last year, I'd probably lean Dallas ever so slightly, and I feel good about that. And I do think that when you look at the depth here in Washington compared to the depth in Philly, maybe you feel a little bit better about this group, like having John Bates. I think people sleep on how productive and effective he is in terms of run game stuff. Zach Ertz has looked great during OTAs and minicamp, and when he's healthy, I think can make a petition to be definitely a top 10 tight end in the NFL. And then Sinnott, obviously Armani, these guys that have all this athletic upside. And we'll see what happens. Obviously, he's got to come together, but I don't know. Like, there's something about that 1-2 punch at the top for Washington that gets me really excited.
Yeah, to me, Sinnott's the wild card here. If Sinnott comes in and is like a stud, then you're like, oh, well, Washington probably has the best group in the division because Bates is just like a blocking third tight end who rumbles and catches a few balls, but mainly just blocks people's faces off. Like, sweet. But I generally, like, you can't count on that, especially as a rookie. So I would probably agree with you that Dallas is just like 1 through 3. It almost feels like they have like low 1 and 2 really solid 2s.
Right.
With Ferguson being a lower end 1, and then the next 2 guys being like really, really solid 2s. So you wind up being plus there. Where Philly is, I mean, it depends on how Uzoma is. Like, Uzoma's had some years where he's really, really good. Yeah. So I don't know. I probably still lean Philly. I'd probably go the upside of Goddard, then Dallas, then Washington, then New York. But there's definitely room for fluctuation in this division, depending on especially how few young guys play. Ben Sinnott probably being the biggest one.
And the Giants, like, I love Bellinger. I think he plays the position
he's a good player.
In like the best way possible. Violent, he catches football well. Theo Johnson, like, athletic freak, but how's he going to be at the NFL level? So they do have some pieces there in New York to get you excited. But again, I think in some ways, like, it's really interesting doing this exercise because it kind of reflects the position around the league. Like, there's the guys, there's the Kittles, there's the Kelseys, there's the Mark Andrews, like those top guys that are difference makers in an offense. And then you get kind of in that middle tier of tight end where it's like it's really scheme dependent and really philosophy dependent. And I think that's why, like, Dallas is interesting because, like, those guys are elevated by scheme, but they work and they're gonna be productive. Like, they're gonna have probably 50 catches, Ferguson, and then the next guy's going to have 25 or 30. You know what I mean? Like they're going to be a very productive group, even though they're not going to be maybe as dynamic as like Goddard, for example. So it really is just kind of perspective and system. There's no guy here like that there are in some other teams, but or like we got to talk about Sam Laporta too. Sam Laporta's kind of in that top tier now also, but there's nobody like that, at least to my eye. There's some very, very good football players. So
no doubt, Ertz probably the guy who was that at one point, but he obviously years past that prime in Philadelphia when he was that dude in the NFL. All right, that is our offensive positional rankings. We'll hit defense next week. I'll have a pod for you later this week. Logan's going to go be a rowdy wedding guest somewhere on the Cape. So we will catch up with Logan back next week. Until then, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. We appreciate you listening, and talk to you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.